Let me just quickly thank our distinguished panelists in the opening session and my colleague Darine for steering the conversation, which, as we all heard, focused quite a bit on really the issue of the moment, the war in Palestine, and the double standards that we see applied across the world. Despite the increasingly loud calls that have echoed right across the globe for an end to the mass killing of Palestinian civilians, for a permanent ceasefire, the world continues to grapple with the devastating consequences of our leaders' collective inability and, in some cases, unwillingness to take strong and decisive action. Will the United Nations' 193 member states continue to be at the mercy of its 5 most powerful nations? Will the UN use all the diplomatic, humanitarian, and peaceful means at its disposal in accordance with Chapters 6 and 8 of the UN Charter to help protect populations from ethnic cleansing? Its members refuse that I will be putting to the Under-Secretary General of the United Nations, Ryder, who is a former Director General of the International Labour Organization. Please welcome Under-Secretary General Ryder. Great to meet you. Finally, I get to sit and conduct an interview, and I'm very pleased to be speaking with you, Mr. Ryder. The UN, as we've been saying for a couple of days, and as so many of us know, was established almost 80 years ago, in fact 78 years ago, to avert the kind of war that we see today in Gaza. There are many who have been saying for years, if not decades, that the United Nations is simply not fit for purpose, or it no longer is. It is dysfunctional, it is outdated, it is ineffective. Do we still need the United Nations?
My short answer to your question is yes, but before I get to the reasons to support that answer, let me first thank the Doha Forum for this opportunity. Thank Qatar also for its leadership in many of the issues that relate to your question. And try to answer your question in a way which relates to the circumstances that we're living in. We are in a world which faces multiple simultaneous crises. Crises of conflict and war, and the situation in Gaza stands foremost amongst them. But just listening to the discussions which have taken place, we face unprecedented humanitarian crises, and let's add to those situations the crises of climate change. We have to see what comes from COP28. And crises of development, let's not forget that. At the halfway stage on the road to the completion of the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda, the scorecard is not very good. Only 15% of targets are being met. So at the same time as we face these crises and we are falling short in resolving them as we would wish, we nevertheless, I think, have in the United Nations to hand the body, the instrument which can help us do better, and we need to do better. We are on our way to a Summit of the Future. The United Nations has convened a Summit of the Future next September, which is precisely designed to not only answer in words but in actions the question you have put, because there seems to be, despite all of the divisions in the world, very widespread consensus that we need multilateralism. We need a system of international cooperation which enables us to address which are quintessentially global crises in a global forum. The UN is the only place that can do that, but we need to do it better, and the summit that we are organizing is designed to re-dynamize the UN, to make it able to meet these challenges more effectively.
You say the UN, you say we need to do better, and I don't think anyone here or anywhere around the world will disagree with that. But you do also say that the UN is indispensable. But let's face it, the United Nations is often completely sidelined, if not willfully absent, from some of the world's major crises. the voice of the Secretary General, once the world's moral authority, is quite often nowhere to be heard. And when it often is too little, too late. If we do bring it back to the situation in Palestine and Gaza, and we put the UN in today's context, it's complete paralysis, isn't it? I mean, you do have the occasional odd and quite symbolic resolution at the General Assembly, but then if one member of the Security Council decides to veto a resolution calling for a ceasefire, it's complete and utter paralysis. Nothing moves ahead. Is that the kind of UN that we need? One that only acts if the most powerful members allow it to?
Well, we certainly have situations such as those prevailing in the Security Council that lead to the type of question that you are putting. And there is no disputing the fact that the United Nations in the ultimate instance is and cannot be more than the aggregated will and actions of its member states. And that indeed is the reality that the UN lives with. It cannot be otherwise.
And I knew you'd say this, and I've often put the question to UN officials, and they've always said, you know, well, it's up to the Security Council. Of course it is. But then isn't there a role for the leadership of the United Nations to speak up when you've got an entire population which for weeks has been under relentless bombing, starvation, being denied the most basic human rights? To invoke Article 99 of the UN Charter, you know, it's a praiseworthy move. I suppose a lot of people have looked on it quite positively. But then some might say, you know, there's more that needs to be done than simply ask for a humanitarian ceasefire, isn't there?
Well, I think it's fair to say that you have heard the Secretary General from the very first day of this conflict speak out, and in other conflicts as well, where it has been a matter of some controversy, speak out very strongly on the basis of the principles of the UN Charter. I think many of you will have heard the Secretary General here in Doha just 2 days ago reiterate some of the messages that he has delivered both to the Security Council and the General Assembly. I think he has been absolutely to the fore.
But Mr. Ryder, just to interrupt you, if I may, but the question is, why invoke Article 99 merely to request a humanitarian ceasefire when you have at least 35 special mandate holders of the Human Rights Council, eminent jurists, legal experts, experts on genocide, some members of the Security Council, and I'm thinking of Brazil and President Lula da Silva, who are all saying there's a genocide in the making?
Well, the Secretary General has invoked Article 99, and not a commonplace thing to do, as you'll be aware, precisely, I think, to generate the type of action that everybody is looking for, to bring an end to the killing in Gaza and to move things forward to the types of diplomatic and political activity that can lead towards the type of political settlement that we need. I think that the Secretary General has been outspoken, has been recognized as having been outspoken in all of these things. If you've also heard what Martin Griffiths has had to say, and we can deplore the shortfall in the funding of humanitarian activity, let's be clear. If it was not for the United Nations presence, as it has been in Gaza and in other fields of conflict and of need, the world would fall much further short than what it is doing. So we are playing, I think, to the limits of what we can, the political leadership role that the Secretary General exemplifies, and the on-the-ground support also that the world needs in these circumstances.
But again, you mentioned the word limit, and we do not see similar limits imposed on the United Nations in the case of other conflicts. We saw how the UN was very quick, in fact, to sanction Russia over its invasion and war in Ukraine. We didn't see the same speed here, did we? We didn't hear the Secretary General sound the alarm bell early enough. Why wait until so many civilians had been killed? At least 40% of them, we keep saying, children.
No.
And the extent, I should add, of Israel's plan to inflict maximum pain and suffering on the Palestinian population was clear from the very beginning. All we needed to do was listen to Israeli officials themselves, the IDF spokesman saying Israel's war was, quote, focused on damage, not accuracy. So quite often again, here in Doha and in so many other places in the world, you hear about double standards. UN and Western nations very quick to sanction some countries and not others.
Well, The Secretary General invoked Article 1999 in respect of Gaza.
Well, he did, but he didn't call for sanctions to be imposed. So my question
to you is,
calling
for sanctions in other
should
places
we implement
either.
international law
He
across
is
the
applying
board?
exactly the same principles, exactly the same objectives in his mind, because he considered the situation in Gaza to be particularly a threat to international peace and security. He has taken, in his mandate at least, the unprecedented move of invoking Article 99. So I don't agree with the idea that he, at least, is in any way indulging in double standards. It's rather, I think, that he is acting in a very courageous way to try to mobilize a type of international action, which I can very well understand people are looking for, in respect of the conflict in Gaza. Now, that said, in the fields of peace and security, as indeed in other areas, be it development, be it humanitarian, I think the Secretary General and we are all conscious of the need to strengthen the instruments that we have at hand. Nobody here is going to argue that whilst the UN is indispensable and absolutely needed in our current circumstances, that its current arrangements are not in need of improvement. And let me revert to this Summit of the Future that we have convened for September next year. The idea is to adopt a pact for the future, with 5 chapters to it, basically. One is on sustainable development and finance for sustainable development, because in the same way as we're short of the funds we need to deal with humanitarian crisis, we are short of the financing we need to turbocharge sustainable development around the world. So we need a fundamental reform of the international financial architecture. Secondly, a new agenda for peace, looking at the types of issues you've mentioned, all the way along the peace continuum, from prevention of conflict to peace building, to peacekeeping, to peace enforcement, and then from that to exit from conflict. A third piece, and it's also worth, I think, our reflection, is how to deal with technological advances, which should be a boon for humanity, but present risks and inequities as well. We need a new global digital compact to govern new technologies. A fourth chapter which deals with youth and future generations. We need a declaration which ensures that when we're taking decisions today to deal with all of these extraordinarily complex problems, we are also taking into account the rights and the interests of generations yet unborn. And fifthly, and perhaps it goes most directly to your question, how to transform our own governance. Do we need to transform that Security Council, which sometimes leads to the blockages that you've referred to? Do we need to make our international financial institutions operate in a different way? Do we need systems of governance which reflect rather better the world of 2023 than what it actually does now, which is to reflect the world of 1945?
I hear a long list of what we need, and I think you and I both know that the issue of reform has been on the agenda for decades now, and one can only imagine that the powerful 5 permanent members will not want to relinquish their veto power, nor will they want more countries to come on board and share those privileges with them. So a whole list of what we need as we look ahead to the Summit of the Future in September in New York. But then I want to go back, and I'm sorry to put you on the spot. I would rather ask these questions to the Secretary General himself, but I have a feeling that he is avoiding me, so I will ask you the questions. I've been trying for an interview for a while, so you might put in a word for me when you go back to headquarters. No, but back to the situation finally in Gaza, and as I stare at the clock, and we're really in the final moments of our interview. It is such a fundamental issue. You mentioned how critical peace and security are for the United Nations. Really, they're fundamental raison d'être. And so I wonder if we do not impose legal consequences, the same standards, on every country that engages in egregious acts that have been described by many, war crimes and so on. If we do not do this, how do we avert the next war, particularly if Russia, China, the US, France, and the UK are always going to have, the option of blocking any resolution to suit their interests. So can the UN really do anything to resolve future wars? Can it salvage what remains of its dented reputation? You mentioned that the UN Secretary General did speak up, some might say a little late, but he spoke up. But then again, does he believe, A, that the Palestinians have the right to self-defense because the United Nations itself reaffirms the right of all peoples to, and I have the exact wording somewhere, to stand up to colonial force, apartheid, and foreign occupation by every mean possible, right? And I think I'll find the wording in a second, but until I do, this is the essence of it. Do Palestinians deserve that right? And do you believe that Israel should be sanctioned once again, or at the very least that the Secretary General should call for an arms embargo against Israel?
Well, let me reiterate what I said earlier on. I think the Secretary General has spoken up from the very first day. I'm a little bit mystified by the idea that he waited until speaking up in terms of what is taking place in Gaza.
He never condemned the attacks
he's used the language he's chosen to use. He has also said, and again, it's attracted controversy from a different direction, that what has taken place has not taken place in a vacuum, and he has restated, I think in the most explicit terms, the need to move back to the search for a two-state solution, which answers your question about the rights of the Palestinian people to a state.
But again, these are words.
We have to continue to...
Sure.
Words are what the Secretary General has. He has a voice, and he uses that voice, as he always says, in the defense of the principles that the UN Charter establishes. And he also likes to say, in addition to principle, he tells the truth. And I think all of those things have been very evident in what he's been saying in these last tragic weeks of conflict in Gaza and in other places as well.
All right, I think we'll have to leave it there. We're being asked to wrap up. Guy Ryder, Under Secretary General of the United Nations, thank you very much indeed for joining me. Thank you so much.